Hello there. Welcome to our third lecture in our Abnormal Psych series. I'm going to stop making promises about how long these are going to be because it's interesting stuff. And you should be interested in it as well. So, who knows how long this one will be, but we're going to talk about mood disorders. There's actually only 2 mood disorders, right? So we just talked about anxiety disorders. They're separated into these categories, and now we're going to look at mood disorders, right? Mood disorders, a little differently than we talk about, like mood. Why are you always in a mood? Mood disorders are characterized by major extremes, right? So we talk about the word mood as in like what kind of mood are you in? Are you happy? Are you sad? Are you anxious? Things like this, like kind of a temporary state. Mood disorders in AP Psych are more characterized by major extremes, right? So we're going to talk about there's only 2 mood disorders, right? So the major depressive disorder and bipolar. So major depressive and bipolar. And we're going to start by talking about major depressive disorder, which is the #1 reason that people seek mental health services. I'm going to give you some symptoms here on the next slide, but just kind of an overview of major depressive disorder. So we've talked a little bit about what makes the abnormal psych, right? That really small percentage of the population is that there's always these things that we go through where everyone gets really sad sometimes, right? Everyone gets really happy sometimes. Everyone gets anxious. These are all very normal feelings, but when it's for too long or too many symptoms, or going back to the DSM-5 where it's affecting our everyday lives for too long, then they're considered these disorders, right? And so the major depressive disorders are, like I said, the #1, even though phobias are more common, they are the #1 reason that people seek mental health services worldwide. Approximately 12 to 17%, depending on what country, of the population will experience a major MDD over their lifetime. And most of the major depressive disorder episodes go away without treatment. So they're normal to have. Pretty good percentage of the population has them, and they will go away over time. And so depression, right, being a state of depression, again, we'll look at the symptoms on the next slide, is something that comes and goes as a part of life. I don't think I put it on the slide, but looking at seasons are a huge reason that people go through states of depression and there's a biological reason for that. So in the fall, when there's less light, and in the winter, people experience more depressive symptoms than they do in the summer when there's sunlight. Biological reason for sadness and depression is our way. So just like when your stomach, you eat something that's poisonous and it makes you sick, or you get really tired when your body's fighting off a flu, is the same reason for why our body experiences sadness. A couple different reasons. It makes us slow down, can cause you to stop exerting energy in places that might not be a good use of your energy, might stop you from chasing like future goals, so that you can focus on the present. And we talked a little bit at the beginning of the year about how the presence of tears and sad moods actually draws people towards us. That we have this tendency to, when we see people sad, that it's our social cues to come in and support. And that is why our body has these periods of sadness, right? Going through grief, people come together. And so depression, the major depressive disorder, is when those symptoms last. So there's 5 or more symptoms for 2 or more weeks, right? So just a little quick going back to anxiety. So most of the time, anxiety is a fear of a future loss, right? So that a fear of losing something in the future. Depression is most often caused by a current or past loss. So it's something that happens now or in the past that we're looking back on, while anxiety is constantly like being in the future. Okay, so here are some of those symptoms for the major depressive disorder. There is a chart in your book for the DSM-5 for the major depressive disorder symptoms. But again, to be diagnosed with major depressive disorder, we're looking for 5 or more symptoms for 2 or more weeks. And here's a list of most of the symptoms. There's a more exhaustive list in your book. So problems regulating appetite, so eating too much or not eating enough. Sleeping too much or not sleeping enough, right? So lethargy is just like sitting around, not having, or feeling tired all the time, or regulating. Oh, it says regulating. I forgot the important. There we go. Regulating sleep, right? So too much or too little. feeling associated with self-esteem, so worthlessness, hopelessness. The definition of hope is that you do not think that it's going to get better. So hope is a feeling that things will get better. And when people lose that idea that things will get better in the future, that's defined as hopelessness. A loss of interest in activities, families, friends for more than 2 weeks, and difficulties concentrating. And so those are some of the symptoms, right? And so when we're looking for diagnosing major depressive disorder, there's a list of symptoms. If you've ever taken one of these surveys, Kaiser gives them out quite often. Some of there's people like playing football outside my room. Kaiser, Sutter does too for mental health. It will ask you like how many times, it literally says how many of the times in the last 5 days have you felt hopeless? How many times in the past 2 weeks? So like it asks you for the past 2 weeks. It's not talking about like things in the past, but it's very like time specific. Okay. Rates of major depressive disorders. Like we said earlier, number one reason people get help. But we do see the major depressive disorder higher diagnosed in females. We'll talk about diagnosis in a second. But as far as this is actually a rate not looking at diagnosis, this is a rate looking at suicides, right? And so this is actually, and I would say actually this is like 3 years old. But our trends have not changed very much. So this is looking at U.S. suicides per 100,000 people, and looking at age range and, males versus females. So something I know they cover in 9th grade health is that suicide rates in males are higher than females. Attempts, so this is different. So these are suicides that where the person actually resulted in dying in death. Attempts do not have the same rates. I'll see if I can find that chart for you. But males tend to use more violent forms of suicide or more permanent use of suicide. So whether that's guns, jumping, hanging, things like that. And females tend to use more of things like cutting or pills, overdose, which don't always result in a complete suicide, versus the males using the more aggressive forms or more violent forms tend to be more successful. The males that you can look at over time, so you do need to know trends of suicides over time. So looking at peaks in different years. So for females, right, you're looking at 45 to 54. Towards the end of life, the males have higher, but there is that overall general trend towards 45 and 50, and then a slight decline. But then for males at the end of life, go up as well. To note, looking at major depressive disorder diagnosis, is that the only true way to diagnose is if people seek help for it, right? So in order to get a diagnosis, you have to seek help, and whether that's people seeking help for you or you bring yourself to a doctor. And we know, especially in the United States, that females are more likely to seek help than males are. So the data suggests that males and females, even though females, what I want to say, you'll see here in a second. I think I have it, the worldwide chart in here. I do, right here. You'll see that worldwide we see that females, right, experiencing major depression more of their life are higher in every single country. I'll come back to this in a second. Women are more susceptible, but we do think that males are affected just as much, but are less likely to seek help or less likely to self-report those symptoms. Okay. Okay. Here, let me go back here because I just skipped around. Okay, I found the graph. Adding a video. So here's the graph from your book that I was just talking about a couple minutes ago. These are the rates of the non-fatal self-injury in the United States. So non-fatal. So we looked at suicide rates. These are the non-fatal self-injury, right? So self-harm, attempts. So we, like I was saying, we do see the females over the males in almost all ages of life, and then especially here in 15 to 19. So different peaks, right? So different peaks for those rates, but I found it, so I just wanted to add it. Okay, so going back to those are the symptoms, 5 or more, 2 more weeks. The suicide rates, though, are higher in males than they are in females. but females tend to be more affected by them. There's also different, very specific types of depression that are specific to females, like postpartum depression. That is why you have that picture of this actress, Brooke. She was someone that came out, oh gosh, I forgot, it was like the Today Show or something. She was one of the first actresses to really speak out about her experiences with postpartum depression, so right after having a child, which is another reason why women are more prone to depression, is because of those fluctuations right after having a child with less sleep, hormones changing, and just like life change. Okay, so the other mood disorder that we need to know about is bipolar disorder. Bipolar disorder actually had, again, we're talking about major depressive and mania. There's actually two types of bipolar, but bipolar is, if you just think about like that, like poles, right? This way and that way, and then bi going between the two of them. Bipolar disorder is people that go in between states of major depressive disorder and mania, or manic states. So those aren't really just like highs, like, oh, I'm feeling good. Like manic states or mania states are talking too fast, talking too much, being too elated, right? So not just happy, but like overjoyed, don't need any sleep, super productive, kind of in this like kind of crazy state, right? And then that goes back and forth with major depressive disorder, right? Major depressive disorder. So kind of going in between. There is no normal. So the bipolar disorder is the right here. Bipolar disorder 1 is kind of the classic diagnosis of like super high highs and super low lows, and you just bounce back and forth between the two, right? They're like episodes that go back and forth. Bipolar disorder 2 is a little bit milder form of bipolar, where they're more of like episodes of manic and depressive with like normal mood in between, right? So bipolar 1 is just going back between the two of them. Bipolar 2 might have some normalcy in between, but then manic states and then depressive states. All right. The hypomania in this 2, what's considered mild, is it's not always like psychotic or psychosis type states. It's just like hypomania being a little bit below that manic state, right? So hypomania just below that manic state. Some very famous authors. So there's this, where did I put the creativity? Here it is. Bipolar disorder, and one of the milder forms like that too, has been really found pretty prevalent around really creative artists and writers. There's some more current examples in your book of like the movie producer Tim Burton, right? So people that go through these very free-flowing creative times where they can't sleep and they're overactive, and like they get very productive and a lot done. Virginia Woolf, I know, is on there, but Mark Twain right here. Oh, he's right here. Sorry. Mark Twain is right here. So writers thought to have probably been a bipolar disorder looking back, and then Catherine Zeta-Jones and Tim Burton are diagnosed. All right, understanding mood disorder is going to go through a couple like causes, right? So let's see. Let's talk here. So there's a lot of different cognitive and behavior changes that accompany depression, right? So that's why there's that really long list of things, whether it's sleep, appetite, mood, disassociated, unactive, things like that. We talked already that depression is widespread. You might have written all this down. So before you blindly write this, make sure you go through, because I've just been kind of chit-chatting. Compared with men, women are nearly twice as vulnerable to major depression. We talked about that because of like postpartum, and more likely to seek help. Most major depressive episodes self-terminate, talked about in the first time, that even without treatment, they self-terminate, but that stressful events, we didn't go over this, related to work, marriage, close relationships, are often those things that, depression follows those things. So you can imagine what has been happening in the world, right, the last year, the very, very stressful events going on for so many people, and very widespread change for us, right? That we've definitely seen more incidents of depression. And it's not just I wouldn't say I don't like when people are like, oh, it's just because of what's going on. Well, it still meets the definition of depression, right? 5 or more symptoms for 2 or more weeks, right? You've been in this pandemic for over a year, so you probably know, and actually based on your surveys that you said today, I know a lot of you have people in your life that are affected by this, if it not only it might even affect you. We do find that this is striking new generations earlier and affecting more people. Again, it could just be because of exposure to it, right? You learn about it earlier. It's more widely accepted. Different stresses at younger ages because of multiple factors. Okay. All right. We already looked at this one, males versus females. All right. Let's go to the biological perspective, right? So looking at biopsychosocial. All right. So the depressed brain, we already looked at our neurotransmitters back in Unit 3 that are associated with depression, right? So serotonin, sad Sarah. Low levels of serotonin in the brain are associated with people who are depressed. Norepinephrine, right? We talk about like nors, kind of snore and quiet and sad, and serotonin are the two ones that we learned about. We do know that this has a genetic component to it, that people that if you have parents or grandparents, close family members that have been diagnosed with depression, that it is linked to genetics, so it's likely to run in the family. Again, that gene, going back to what a gene does, like it makes the genes code for proteins, right? And they make the things like serotonin, norepinephrine. So if you're missing that gene that makes that, more likely to suffer. Okay. I completely skipped this slide. Okay. So here are a PET scan. This is a good review. So right. So PET scan looking at glucose, active glucose, my areas of the brain that are burning glucose, right? That means they're active, right? Because when cells need energy, we burn glucose, right? So this is a depressed state, right? So this is like understanding the disorder of bipolar, right? So depressed state, we see underactive, right? So the red means highly active, the blue means like low energy, right? Not enough or not any glucose being burned. This is the depressed state right here. This is a manic state, so all of a sudden we see these areas of the brain's high activity and then back to the depressed state, right? So we can also see with brain scans like PET scans, overactive and underactive places of our brain. Understanding it by an explanatory style, so looking at how we cognitively, this is cognitive, right? So this event happens, right? I break up with a boyfriend or girlfriend. If I think I'll never get over this, right? So this I'll never get over this. This is a stable, permanent thing in my life. Then with or without my boyfriend, I can't seem to do anything right. Our breakup was all my fault. This leads to the depressive explanatory state, right? Versus viewing something, this is cognitive, right? Like appraisal. This is a temporary thing. This is hard, but I'm going to get through it. I miss them, but thankfully I have these other people. It takes two to make a relationship work. It wasn't all my fault. Then we get to successive coping. So, right? So this is not biological at all. This is completely how I explain cognitively, how I explain what's going on is where ultimately I will end up. Oh dear, it's time for PLC. Okay. Social cognitive. So, right, that's biopsychosocial, right? Looking at the social cognitive perspective, is that we often see that depression isn't a very cyclical, right? So you get into a depressive state, something goes wrong, which leads to more depressed mood, which makes you think, oh my gosh, I'm so stupid. I can't believe I did that, which makes me make more mistakes, which leads to a lower mood. So we see this cyclical, vicious cycle of depression, right? So here's an example right here of that, right? So I have a stressful experience. I broke up with my boyfriend or girlfriend. This is all my fault. It's because I'm a horrible person. Now I'm sad. And now I forgot to do my homework and my parents are mad at me, which leads to more stress. And then that's because I'm a horrible person. And right, you can see how that just keeps going down and down until we interject into that thought process. Okay. All right. Last slide here is kind of a accumulation of everything I just talked about, right? So if you have these things written down, the biopsychosocial, don't need to write this down, but make sure that you have those things categorized, right? So you'll have to know which of the following is the biological explanation of depression? Which of the following is a psychological or cognitive explanation, right? I think the only thing I didn't cover in here, brain chemistry. Looking at how our brain chemistry changes during teenage years. That's actually bipolar disorder, like the mood swings. I forgot to talk about that. And the teenagers have been more diagnosed over the last 10, 20 years. So that's been something that's been on the uptrend that might actually, the DSM-5 might actually be changing that slightly because of other things going on, like the when we talked about in the last one, the mood dysregulation. I'm just scanning. Gender differences. Over here, psychological influences. So not fitting into gender schemas, gender roles, gender, not feeling like your gender identity matches that which your society says so. And cultural expectations, depression, evoked responses. All right, so we have covered all of this. All right, next lecture will be on schizophrenia. We've now covered 3 of our 5. Still a long lecture. All right, guys. We only have just 10 more lectures left. You're done? You'll be done with me. All right, I'll see you guys soon. Bye.